Imagine a place so secure, so isolated, that the walls themselves weigh more than your hope of escape. Welcome to the heart of America's most hardened prison, ADX Florence. The birth of the fortress. It was the early 1980s and the U.S. federal prison system was facing a chilling reality. 2 correctional officers were murdered within hours of each other at the USP Marion in Illinois. 1 guard stabbed as he escorted inmates, another killed in a separate incident only hours later. Wikipedia, the message was clear. Even maximum security prisons weren't sufficient to contain the worst of the worst. Some prisoners were simply beyond conventional control. In response, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, BOP, began work on a radical concept. A prison designed not just to house dangerous criminals, but to isolate them, to place each man in a cell of reinforced concrete, under 24-hour surveillance with minimal human contact. The idea: if someone has shown they're so dangerous that they murder guards, threaten lethal violence and can't be controlled, then treat them differently. Wikipedia. That prison became ADX Florence. Officially known as the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, USP Florence ADMAX, it opened its doors on January 10, 1995, in Fremont County, Colorado. Wikipedia. Nestled on the high plains a couple of hours south of Denver, the facility occupies some 49 acres within the larger federal correctional complex, Florence. 5,280 magazine. Architecturally and operationally, it was a new breed of prison. Every cell built almost entirely of poured, reinforced concrete. The windows purposely tiny, in some cases only 4 inches by 4 feet, so the inmate couldn't get any sense of where they were. The exercise yard was a concrete pit barely allowing 10 straight-line steps or 31 steps in a circle, designed so the prisoner couldn't map the terrain, couldn't orient himself for escape. Wikipedia. The doors? Over 1,400 steel remote-controlled portals. Motion detectors, cameras at every turn, pressure pads in the floors. Soundproofing built-in, designed to isolate even mentally from other men. One official called the place a clean version of hell. Wikipedia. Why was this extreme response needed? Because the danger had become extreme. Some inmates had killed guards in other facilities. Some were terrorists whose escape could threaten national security. Some were mob bosses or cartel kingpins with resources to reach outside. ADX's mission: to take out the element of risk by removing human contact, by reducing variables, by building containment into every inch of the prison's architecture. Upon arrival, new inmates often entered what was called Level 0, the first year or more of their time in near total isolation. 1 phone call per month, no visits, no television, minimal personal property, all to reflect that they were now among the most tightly controlled prisoners in America. Wikipedia. But the story of ADX Florence is not just about steel and concrete. It's about the human element, the correction officers who walk their rounds with rifles strapped, the prisoners whose days blur together in silence, the families waiting for a slim visit or phone call, the walls that don't just confine bodies but reshape minds. Inside the belly of the beast, step beyond the razor wire fences, past the motion sensors, and through the silent electronic doors of ADX Florence, and you enter a world that feels less like a prison and more like a high-security laboratory, one where the lab subjects are the most dangerous men the country has ever contained. Every hallway is a straight line. Every corner is engineered so an inmate can't hide. Even the air vents are designed to prevent communication between cells. ADX is divided into multiple units, each stacked with layers of restrictions that would crush the spirit of the average person. And yet, for many prisoners, this is just another day inside the fortress. The control unit, where time stops. The most infamous section is the control unit, a place so restrictive that even among ADX inmates, it has a dark reputation. This is where prisoners are locked down alone in their cells for about 23 hours a day. The cell doors are made of thick steel, with only a narrow slot used for food trays and restraints. Officers delivering meals do so with double locking mechanisms, ensuring no direct contact. Inside the cell, everything is concrete: the bed, the desk, the stool. The sink is stainless steel, bolted into the wall, designed to be impossible to dismantle. The toilet doesn't have a handle. Water flow is controlled from outside the cell. Even the shower inside each cell is on a timer, automatically shutting off to prevent misuse. Isolation is the primary tool here. A prisoner in the control unit might go days, sometimes weeks, without seeing another human face. Interaction is limited to a few words from an officer or a medical worker. 4 men who came from prisons where loud voices, clanging metal, and constant commotion defined their lives. The silence here is shocking, almost disorienting. The walls swallow sound. The ceilings deaden it. Some inmates claim you can hear your own heartbeat louder than anything else. The Special Housing Unit, SHU. Another major section is the SHU, the Special Housing Unit. Many federal prisons have a SHU, but ADX's version is in a category of its own. Prisoners who break rules or pose a threat anywhere else in the complex often end up here. Time in the SHU is typically temporary, but temporary at ADX can mean months, even years. Here, inmates get slightly more property and slightly more contact than the control unit, but the routines remain heavily restricted. Some prisoners will go so long without a normal conversation that when they finally speak, their voices crack from lack of use. Others begin talking to themselves, practicing conversations that may never happen. The step-down program. Not everyone stays in permanent lockdown. ADX operates a step-down program, a slow, deliberate process that can take years, designed to test if an inmate can eventually return to a lower security environment. It starts with granting the inmate more out-of-cell time, maybe an additional hour of recreation, maybe access to limited programming, or a chance to eat in a small group instead of alone. But these opportunities come with microscopic oversight. Officers observe everything: posture, tone of voice, reactions, body language. A single outburst, a single threat, a single poorly chosen word can send someone right back to the control unit. Many inmates describe the step-down program as a psychological minefield. Progress is possible, but the fear of messing up keeps them constantly on edge. Those who pass every stage may eventually be transferred out of ADX to a slightly less restrictive prison, but this process can take many years. For some men it never happens. Unit H, the home for terrorists. One of the most notorious wings is Unit H, often used to house inmates linked to terrorist activity, domestic and international. After September 11th, this unit became even more closely watched. Communication privileges are the tightest here. Letters often take weeks or months to process, phone calls are scarce and heavily monitored, and visits are rare. Inside Unit H, luminaries of violence have lived side by side, though never face to face. Men like Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker, in the 9/11 attacks. Some prisoners are kept under special administrative measures, SAMs, meaning every word they speak, write, or hear is screened to ensure they cannot direct violence outside the prison walls. For these inmates, life becomes a loop of silence, steel, and regulation. The world beyond ADX fades until it feels like a distant memory, drifting somewhere beyond the concrete horizon. Range 13 in X's darkest corridor. But there's a place even more restrictive than the control unit or Unit H. A place most inmates never see and even some guards never enter. Range 13. This tiny wing, with only a handful of cells, is reserved for prisoners under the harshest restrictions in the entire federal system. Men placed here have often assaulted staff members, attempted escapes, or proven so volatile that even ADX's standard isolation isn't enough. On Range 13, inmates may go months without leaving their cells at all. When they finally do, it's for a highly controlled shower or medical exam, and always under heavy restraint. Few details about Range 13 have ever been released publicly. Officers who've worked there describe it simply as the end of the line. A day in ADX, the routine of extreme control. A typical day at ADX begins at 5 a.m., when lights turn on automatically inside every cell. Breakfast is delivered through the narrow food slot, with officers rotating silently from door to door. Inmates eat alone. After breakfast comes a series of status checks, medical rounds, and basic cell maintenance. Some prisoners are allowed a short recreation period in their concrete exercise pen. Others are not. Every movement, every delivery, every interaction is logged. Officers work in pairs, sometimes trios. Communication is done with caution and precision. Mistakes aren't tolerated because mistakes can cost lives. Yet even in this hyper-controlled environment, human stories unfold. Battles with mental health, moments of remorse, flashes of anger, unexpected friendships, and personal transformations, both uplifting and heartbreaking. Life inside a 7 by 12 concrete box. Life inside ADX Florence is defined by one thing: isolation. Not just physical isolation but psychological isolation so deep it becomes part of an inmate's identity. The average cell measures just 7 feet by 12 feet, smaller than a suburban walk-in closet. In this cramped concrete world, every surface has a purpose, and every missing item is intentional. Each cell contains a concrete bed platform, often topped with a thin, fire-retardant mattress. A tiny concrete desk and a round concrete stool are molded into the floor, impossible to move, impossible to weaponize. The windows, if you can call them that, are narrow vertical slits angled upward so that inmates can see nothing but sky. No mountains, no fences, no guards. Just blue, white, or darkness. This design is deliberate. ADX was built to prevent inmates from knowing the layout of the prison or the surrounding land. No mental maps. No orientation. No chance of planning an escape. The rhythm of nothingness. For most inmates, a typical day is a cycle without variation. The lights flip on at dawn. Breakfast comes through the food slot. A few hours later, lunch. And then dinner. Days bleed into each other, marked only by the sound of metal sliding against metal. The silence is oppressive. There's no yelling from tier to tier, no casual conversations, no buzzing common areas. Some sections of ADX are so acoustically isolated that an inmate can scream at the top of his lungs and the man in the next cell might never hear him. Many prisoners develop their own coping mechanisms to fight the slow erosion of the mind. Some exercise endlessly, doing hundreds of push-ups, sit-ups, or pacing back and forth until their muscles burn. Others read anything they can get, legal papers, religious texts, outdated magazines that have been inspected for contraband. Some talk to themselves, creating imaginary conversations just to hear a voice. But not all inmates cope well. The mental toll of extreme solitude. Psychologists have long warned that humans are not meant to live in near total isolation. At ADX, the effects often show quickly. Some prisoners begin hearing things, imagined footsteps, non-existent whispers, phantom voices. Others start to hallucinate, seeing shadows move across their walls or shapes forming in their peripheral vision. Though the prison has mental health staff, the environment itself makes treatment difficult. Therapy sessions often take place through walls or via closed-circuit systems. Real human connection remains nearly non-existent. Some inmates break in other ways. They become paranoid, compulsively cleaning their cells or obsessing over minuscule details, counting cracks in the concrete, memorizing every scrape in the steel door, tapping rhythms for hours at a time. There are stories of inmates smearing feces, flooding their toilets, or refusing to speak for months. Others withdraw completely, spending whole days staring at the ceiling, motionless, unresponsive. ADX calls itself the Alcatraz of the Rockies. But unlike Alcatraz, it's not the waves that grind inmates down, it's time. The rare moments of human contact. In a place designed to reduce interaction to the bare minimum, even simple moments feel monumental. A guard saying good morning, a nurse adjusting medication, a chaplain offering a few words of scripture. These become lifelines. In the step-down program, inmates may eventually earn limited group meals or monitored activities. Officers watch closely, noting every gesture. Even sitting at a table with just 2 or 3 other men can feel overwhelming for someone who's spent years locked inside solid walls. Some inmates break down during these first group encounters, overwhelmed by voices, movement, or the simple shock of proximity. Others cling to these moments like oxygen, desperate to prove they can function in a world outside their cell. But progress isn't guaranteed. One slip, a threat, a fight, even a raised voice, can send an inmate backward, undoing years of perceived improvement. Glimpses of hope, even in hell. Not every story at ADX ends in despair. A few inmates find religion, writing, or new discipline. Some reconnect with family through limited phone calls or heavily screened letters. A handful work their way through all stages of the step-down program and eventually transfer to less restrictive prisons, often with a renewed sense of stability. These success stories are rare, but they exist. Even inside ADX, the human spirit can spark in the darkest corners. Why ADX exists? To many Americans, ADX Florence is a necessary evil, a place to keep society safe from individuals deemed too dangerous for any other environment. For the officers who work there, it's a job that requires vigilance, patience, and mental toughness. For the inmates, it's a world unto itself, silent, unforgiving, and relentlessly monotonous. Some critics call the prison psychological torture. Supporters call it essential. But regardless of opinion, one fact remains undeniable. ADX Florence is unlike any other prison in the United States. And the men inside it live a reality most people cannot imagine. ADX Florence isn't just a prison. It's a fortress where the walls don't just hold people in. They reshape the mind, the will, and the very concept of time. For some inmates, it's the final stop. For others, a slowly opening door.